up this week on the Just Lifestyle Show 848. Richard and Garry are both here, and we've got lots to talk about. New builds of Windows 11 for Windows Insiders, lots in that. There's some trouble at Microsoft Room, perhaps with antitrust issues around Azure and practices, so Richard's going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking Raspberry Pi compute modules, a bit of retro computing, a bit of EV, and a bit of everything. So let's get straight to Richard and Garry. Richard, Garry, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And here we are, run up to our 4-day bank holiday weekend in the UK. We get the Easter, so get ready for that. And I've actually got really pleased because I've got tickets to go out and watch the British GT Championship at Alton Park next weekend as well, right, on the bank holiday Monday. So yeah,
fantastic. That sounds great.
Yeah, so I actually had to reset my Lumia 950 XL, which was running Windows 11. I've put it back to running Windows Phone or Windows 10 mobile because it's got FM radio on it, and the commentary is always in FM radio. So you can stream it, but of course you use a load of data in the middle of a field using all your battery. So what's better than to get the old Lumia out with the headphones on and actually FM radio on it? So it's a real FM radio. I don't think phones have FM radios anymore, do they?
No.
Well, I mean, I think the authorities in the UK for sure would very much like to turn off the FM band anyway. So,
yeah, that's right. I'm sure, but a lot of events. Well, certainly a lot of sports events like motor racing tend to use the FM range for the commentary. So hopefully they keep that going a bit longer, because I always find it quite handy because I have to wander around with the commentary on or whatever. So
yeah, I think kind of local broadcast should keep on working regardless, because it's really useful, and also it must be a good revenue stream. So I mean, I've been to a few events where they'll charge you £5 to have a little earpiece, and then hey, where you go, it's good, very useful.
Yeah, so instead I've got a Lumia 950 XL. Can't do that on your Surface Duo.
I haven't got a Surface Duo, but
you can't do that on your iPhone.
I can tell you I definitely can't do that on the iPhone, because the iPhone is an awful device, and I have one, so I know.
Well, aside from that then, so we've got quite a few things to talk about this evening. We did get a new build after a couple of weeks off, and I have to admit I was wrong. More on that. Richard, you've got some stuff on bundling and Raspberry Pi. So first we'll start with the I have to admit I was wrong. I did say last week that we'll get a new build, which
you were right about.
Yes, all right, we'd get a new build, and I said that it would include tabbed browser, because that's why they didn't have a previous build last week, because they were waiting to announce it at the Windows event, and the tab browser would be there for us all to see and test last week, and it wasn't. So I got that bit wrong, but we did get a new build. Not much to say about that build. In fact, even Microsoft kind of said, there's not much in it, but there's a lot of fixes, which it's true, there is a lot of fixes in there, but there wasn't a huge amount of changes.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you try this build?
I did, yeah. I mean, I think the only main visible one that I saw was File Explorer. The homepage is now called Home. And they've fiddled around with that. Well, I think Quick Access is now gone, hasn't it? Or it's changing.
Yeah, it's now favorites, isn't it, and pinned.
Which it's one of those
pinned
things.
And recent.
It's one of those things that I know it's going to generate all kinds of friends and family support about. Where's that gone? And why's that changed? Oh, crikey! Luckily, they're all using Windows 10, so I've got a few years yet.
Some of the changes we did see kind of. This was shown off at the event last week, wasn't it? These changes, but there is all the OneDrive, SharePoint, and other content is all sort of surfaced in the recent part. I'm actually finding that quite handy now, and it's renamed to Home, which I think it was called Home in a previous version of Windows. What was it? Well, look, it was a previous Windows 10. Was it Windows 8? It was called Home. Anyway, it's Home now. Quick access is gone, and
I remember the old days when it's called my computer and things, but I think we all know who owns your computer really.
Yeah, my computer. Yeah, Yeah, Windows XP brought that in, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember now. It's such a long time ago.
Actually, Windows 95 had my computer in, didn't it? And you had my computer, and you had my briefcase.
Oh, briefcase, yeah.
Whatever happened to briefcase?
No longer required. You got OneDrive, that's fine.
Wouldn't it? When they got rid of SkyDrive, wouldn't it have been better if they called it my briefcase? I think they should have. Anyway, so yeah, all the content is in there for the your shared content. So even if it's not on your machine, but someone has shared a file. So if you shared a file with me over OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint, that would show up there as well. So it kind of makes sense to have it as your main entry point for files. But no tab browsing yet. So hopefully that'll come soon. I did think that's why we didn't get the build the week before, but obviously that wasn't the reason. So hopefully we'll get the tab browsing soon, because that's the thing everybody wants to test. And then I actually think that's one of those features that when they do deliver that, people will actually use, as opposed to some things like widgets and things which kind of get a bit overlooked because there's not a huge demand for them.
Yep.
So it was build 22593, still beta and dev on the same development branch as well at the moment. So 22H2 update. I suspect we'll have this for a few more weeks yet, maybe a couple months, and then dev will go off to a new branch, and beta will be the version that it will be rolled out, and then it go release preview, and then to users in end of September, October time. I think what else they change on there? There's a bit of UI changes, wasn't there, for the folders on the start menu. There was a bit of and there was a huge amount of fixes in there, but there's still issues with the tablet mode, I noticed as well when I was using it on my Surface Go the other day. So
yes, I'd say those issues being don't use Windows as a tablet. It just, since Windows 8 it's not really worked properly as a tablet, it's fine. So just don't do it.
The only thing I'm missing now is the swipe to switch applications. I really missed that in tablet mode. And it was such an obvious feature to have on in Windows 10, and then in Windows 11 bringing the widgets in. I just to task switch now in Windows 11 in tablet mode, you've got to swipe up twice, or swipe up at least once to get the task switcher, or swipe up twice to get your task menu, so your start menu. So in Windows 10 you could just swipe from the left like that. So I really do miss that. So I really hope that comes back in some way, because the task switching in tablet mode is a bit cumbersome. You've got to use the task switcher button on the start menu, so that requires a swipe up and then to do it.
Yeah. But again, to be fair, the whole thing has been clunky since the demise of how Windows 8 did the tablet stuff. They did the tablet start menu. So and for all the ways I dislike Windows 8 as a tablet, it worked really, really well.
Yeah, I think peak tablet mode was Windows 8. Or Windows 8.1 probably. But Windows 8 only had the split thing, didn't it?
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of other fixes. And you won't get this build if you're in China on a Lenovo PC. I don't know why that is the case, but that's the case.
It's been like that for a few releases now, actually. So it's it's. I have asked why, and I've not really had a response back as to what's wrong with those PCs. It's different, but I mean, clearly there's wrong's the wrong word to use. There's obviously something in there. Maybe it's a localization problem.
Oh, and the other thing was the Microsoft Journal is now pinned to the pen menu if you've got it installed. And Microsoft Journal's actually officially grown up now, isn't it? It was a garage project, and now it's a real project.
Yep.
I did give it a try on my Surface Go, but I use OneNote for everything. I just can't think of a good reason really why I would switch away from OneNote. It does look like it's got some nice pen input features, but when I quickly tested it, it didn't sync up on the devices, so I'm not quite sure how I would do that, whether there's a way of doing that. But of course, with OneNote, I've got it on every device, phone and everything. So it's the sort of the go-to place for everything. So I don't see myself replacing it, but it does look quite a good pen experience. Yeah, so that was all. We didn't even get a servicing pipeline last week. I'm very disappointed by that.
Yes, I'm sure one's coming in. Don't worry, one's bound to be along fairly soon.
Yeah. So that was the only insider news we had last week. But what happens if you wanted to move your taskbar to the top or to the bottom? When can we do that?
Oh dear. Okay. Yeah, there's been a bit of a hoo-ha about this, hasn't there? Yeah. So the Microsoft team, I think the Windows product team, did an ask me anything type thing to kind of basically let people ask questions. And one of the questions came back was, well, we used to be able to move the taskbar in Windows 10, and we can't move it in Windows 11. And why is that? Why can't we do that? And what's come back from Microsoft, and this was in I saw this in Neowin, and I think also Paul Thurrott mentioned it as well, was the response. The response kind of smacked somewhat of arrogance, really. They basically said, no one wants it, really. We're thinking about it, but it's not that important. Which I understand to a certain extent, because obviously Microsoft has got to satisfy a huge market. But if you look at the feedback hub, it's the most, being able to move the taskbar is the most upvoted feedback piece at the moment. So I don't understand why it's not even on. It doesn't even seem to be on the roadmap, unless you guys know something different. But that seems to be, it's like they're throwing in things that really widgets, fine, don't care about that. But I would like to customize the desktop the way I used to be able to do in Windows 10. So I don't understand why this is such an issue for Microsoft to bring back. I mean, the taskbar was obviously changed. The start menu was changed in Windows 11, which has been controversial, but mostly it's okay. But there's some little bits and pieces about customizing how your desktop experience works that I think they've almost thrown the baby out with the bathwater here. And the response that, it's something which they're going to look at it and they'll think about it, but there's no set date for when it's going to come back. So just sit down and enjoy the updates. It just felt a bit arrogant, really,
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's and that is the one thing I've seen. Look at a user base from a day job point of view. I think that's the one thing I'm a little bit worried about with Windows 11. There are a few users that use that feature, and that will go away. And yeah, it's not the end of the world, but it's something that you've got to explain. No, you can't do that anymore. And I can imagine the reaction to that. So it's good that we're getting stuff like tab browsing, which in File Explorer, which I know a lot of people ask. But like you said, that dragging that taskbar around it is a high feedback. Item.
It's on things that's annoyed me as well, because of, again, my particular workflow, again, which is not everyone's, but it's just, it's one of those things. It's like right clicking for the task manager gone. I think, well, why is that gone? There's no real good reason for taking that away. You've made a decision, and I don't know. It kind of smacked of some arrogance, which is like the Microsoft of old, rather than, we've got so used to the insider program and seeing these new builds and things and feeling as though we're able to influence things, or at least via the feedback hub give Microsoft some hints as to what should happen next. Doesn't feel it's happening this time around. Perhaps that's just me, but it's some parts of the team are getting ever so pumped about everything, but also a little disconnected too.
Yeah, Gary, is this something that you see an issue for you, the dragging the taskbar around, or just the Windows 11 start menu?
Actually, in terms of family support, it's probably a good idea that it's completely locked and they can't move it. Which is probably where it came from, actually. I think they got a lot of feedback about people accidentally moving it. But it should be, I mean, it would have been easy enough to put a setting in the settings that could lock it until you unlock the settings and then you'd move it. I mean, I mean, there seems to be a lot of things. It's almost we can't be bothered to do this. It's got other priorities like putting adverts on.
Well, that's just it. It's like, here's some new widgets and add some things. You think, well, Okay.
Yeah, adds in File Explorer, which we talked about a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem a bit counterintuitive, and perhaps to dismiss it a little bit is probably not such a good thing. But they've got the telemetry, so I suppose they do know how often it's used. But I'm sure it must be. Well, I've seen it in use, so there are many features in Windows which I've never seen used by anybody.
Yeah.
Whereas something I do see.
All I would say is they ignore the feedback hub at their peril, because we know what happened the last time they ignored what was in the feedback hub. I'm not saying that something went terribly, terribly wrong. Actually, I'm saying so much went terribly, terribly wrong. But they do need to pay attention to what's in the feedback. I mean, this seems a very minor thing, a very small bone you could throw people. They'd be, and everyone's, oh, great, they're lovely, they responded, but they seem to be just doubling down. But Gary, I do take your point that certainly it's a lot easier from a support point of view to lock things down.
Yeah. Yeah. Just don't get support calls if you don't let them do it.
No. And there was something else which you were mentioning, Rich, about Microsoft being in potential hot water, not particularly around the start menu, but some other areas.
Oh yeah, this is kind of a bit of a case of deja vu, isn't it? It's the antitrust stuff. This is that there was an interview Bloomberg had this morning, I think, with Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, and it was almost in response to there's been a lot of complaints from Microsoft rivals and some of their partners, saying that their software, Office and things, is very much tied to Microsoft's own cloud. It's getting progressively harder to run this stuff in other clouds. I mean, obviously Teams is a no-no anyway, but things like the Office applications, SQL Server recently, Microsoft changed how the licensing for that worked. So you couldn't carry your licenses on-prem to, say, AWS. You had to carry it into Azure, or you'd pay extra money. And so this has been rumbling for a while, and I've been following it. Certainly, there's been various anti-competitive or anti-competition things filed in the European courts. I know one was filed earlier this year concerning tying of things, tying of things into desktop as well, like OneDrive. And it's kind of almost like a Microsoft of old thing, in that they got into big trouble a few decades back with bundling things in the operating system and being generally anti-competitive, and then they were all lovely and cuddly and wonderful and nice, and they've all been great since. And now again we seem to be getting back to the competition saying, well, hold on a second, they're starting to tie their products, which would have been able to be run anywhere. You're going to have to sign up for Azure if you want this. So it's I can certainly see the concern that the competition might have, because Microsoft is still really the only place in town if you want things like Office. So I can see why the companies, I think, got to tread very carefully now, because it wouldn't take a lot for regulators to make life very difficult. And it wasn't a great time for either Microsoft or, to be fair, for consumers when we had all the mayhem 20 odd years ago.
Yeah. And they do say those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, or around that.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, obviously, it's it should look and see what happened to Internet Explorer. Pretty much destroyed, wiped out by the by browser choice and things. And now we're looking at, okay, so you're doing some very odd license or some very restrictive licensing, which is making people like Google and Amazon get a bit angsty.
Yeah, and I suppose so from a cloud point of view, it's when things are tied down by the licensing rather than the technical limitation is when it feels wrong.
Yes, exactly. So you could, I mean, I think back in, was it 2019, I think, where they changed the licensing for SQL Server is a good example, where you could have brought your on-prem license and taken it pretty much anywhere you wanted to. They changed things to make it a lot harder, and you had to pay a lot more to run, say, SQL Server in somebody else's cloud if you were trying to transfer your licenses from on-prem. And I know that AWS, Amazon Web Services, got very, very grumpy about that. And there's now complaints in the EU, kind of about the way the licensing is now working that forbids customers from using competing cloud services or makes it very difficult. Many more hoops to actually jump through. So if you want to use this Microsoft product on this cloud, it's difficult. Whereas if you go down the Microsoft route and use Azure and have you, everything's fine and wonderful and probably a bit cheaper at the moment, because that's how anti-competitive practices work. So yeah, it's interesting. But I think what was interesting today was in the interview with Bloomberg, Brad Smith did say that there are some valid concerns, and he said, it's important for the company to learn and make some changes. So hopefully that's not just words, and they are going to do some stuff. But I've seen in the last few months, many more people stepping forward saying, well, this is not right. It's you shouldn't be in this situation where you have one company doing all this stuff and there's no competition.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? So they ended up with this problem with the browser, and then all the, like you said, browser choice and Chrome and everything else, and they completely lost that market and still trying to recover from that. They're in a very strong position with Azure as a cloud platform, and they don't really want to squander that through legislation that could set them back another 10, 20 years in the cloud market if that gets antitrust get involved.
Exactly, and I don't know how they deal with this, because you can certainly see they would much rather you ran your Office applications on Azure, because they know all the hooks and things. It'll be easier for them, but equally customers have to have the choice of where they run this stuff. And so I wonder if we might get back to, again, sort of different divisions of Microsoft almost competing against each other.
Yeah, definitely, and I hope they don't go back to that, because that's that famous org chart, isn't it, with the with all the guns pointing at each other.
Yeah,
don't want that.
Yeah, and from a developer point of view, Garry, do you feel that if you're trying to use the Microsoft system, do you feel that their licensing practices are pushing you in one direction, or is it still the competing technologies that make the choice?
I think at the moment it's competing technologies. I mean, licensing from a dev point of view, Microsoft are actually pretty good at their developer licensing. I mean, as long as you're a corporate, you can afford them. But the commercial licensing is really good, and recently their free community editions of their tooling has actually been pretty good as well. And obviously .NET's open source anyway, so you've got there's some proprietary bits around the corners, but most languages are open source. So I think that's not an issue at the moment, but there's been sort of worrying signs over some of the restructuring which has gone on. I mean, we mentioned the GitHub changes a few months back, and some of the things I've seen out of that I'm not overly comfortable with, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, so far so good. I mean, certainly the things I'm hearing which are coming in build look very good. Looks like they're maintaining the way they've worked up to now. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely has been interesting over the last year to see that almost shift back to the old Microsoft, which had very much gone away, and it seems to be let's make sure we can make as much profit as we can from everything. It seems to be the line at the moment. Whereas before they weren't worrying too much about that because they're making so much money out of Azure.
Yeah,
which they still are.
And this, I think, is one of the things, because it's not as if Microsoft are short of cash. They are still making huge profits. And Azure is growing nicely. It seems, I don't know why they're. I mean, I guess from a commercial standpoint, more commercial, it seems illogical to force people down the Azure route when Azure is growing quite happily by itself anyway. And as you say, you have the developer Microsoft, which, aside from a little wobble around Visual Studio last year, has actually been very good in terms of open source and very good in terms of being very supportive of customers. I mean, I use Visual Studio Code, which I think is really a fantastic tool, and open source and pretty much free.
Yeah, and I think, I guess that's why this article today has come out, is they realise that the potential antitrust could cause a lot of damage, so they've got to start the bit of the positive PR around to try and get that perception back again.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Build before, Garry, as well. I don't think we've actually talked about that, but I think they've announced the dates for Build now.
Yeah, so it's end of May. I do have it here somewhere. Basically, last week in May.
And virtual once again.
Virtual once again, yeah. Which in some ways isn't bad, because with the time zones and because they do put everything on demand, which is useful. It makes it slightly easier to keep track of. But yeah, I mean, I've had a sneak peek of some of the stuff coming up in build, and it's going to be very well worth watching from a developer point of view, but possibly even from a consumer point of view. There's some interesting stuff coming out from the, what should we say, the prosumer way.
Microsoft Open Sources Media Center. You heard it here first.
Oh,
sorry, I was just having a little happy dream then. Sorry.
Have you noticed, by the way, that the Groove Media Player that was renamed Media Player is actually now called Windows Media Player?
Yes.
So there's actually two Windows Media Players on your system now. So you've got the classic one and the new one. The new one, which is fine to me, but I just thought it's funny. We're back with it being called Windows Media Player again.
24 to 26th of May for the build. Registration opens very shortly.
Yeah,
and it's free again.
Yeah, I think as much as you miss out on with the virtual ones, you miss out on the in-person chats and things like that. But actually, for people that wouldn't be able to go anyway through cost or work or personal reasons or whatever, it makes it all open. That it's more inclusive that way. And we can get to watch the keynotes, and they've got the technology now pretty good to do that. I don't know whether we'll see any. I doubt whether we'll see any big sort of Windows type announcement stuff, because we had the Windows event, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, last week, and maybe Surface events always seem to have their own events now. So whether 22H2 will be announced as a thing there, I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it's more of a developer event anyway, like you said. Yeah, well, we'll see what comes on from that. I think there's another Microsoft event. Is it Ignite that's going to be another virtual one?
Yep, that's right. Ignite, and I think Inspire too. Inspire is the one for the commercial partners. Ignite is more for admins and things.
And these are all virtual now, so Microsoft's still not going with the in-person events. I don't know. I think it's probably wise at the moment. You just don't know, do you? So everything looks fine, and you can book a big event in, and then find that it's 6 months' time or 12 months' time, the situation has changed again. So it's probably wise at the moment to keep those virtual. I wonder if they'll go back to the in-person events next year.
I mean, I was having this discussion the other day, and it's actually difficult to see Microsoft going back to in-person events, because in terms of the value they get out of them. I mean, initially there were things like TechEd and that we were actually making a profit at one stage, but then the costs started going up, and the costs have got more and more recently. I mean, is the big cost? The big cost of the moment is shipping. I mean, if you have to ship something to somewhere to display it or set it up, and shipping people as well, it gets really costly, and they get a lot more benefit out of these virtual events because they're spreading their message a lot wider. They're getting to a lot more people than they would otherwise.
They are, but I'd question how much they're engaging with people. I mean, both of you and me would much prefer an in-person event, because the networking side of it is the bit I live for on the events, but we see it from both sides. I get your point. I mean, there are some people they may really need to talk to in person, which they're not reaching. But maybe they've got other channels being lined up for that, because I've heard a lot about focus meetings and things like that, which are in person. Yes, I mean, certainly. I mean, there are some in-person events happening. I mean, I don't think they'll ever go back to the way these events were done before. I kind of hope they'll go to a more hybrid version where you'll be able to decide if you go or you watch all the things online.
I could see them going back to how they did some of the events where they invited the press and key people, and then the rest of it was virtual.
I mean, certainly from a press standpoint, it's actually quite difficult to have to. When I say difficult, you just don't get the same type of content when it's controlled through a communications team. When you can't actually talk to a person, it becomes quite hard from a pressman. But from an ordinary user, most users would have watched these things on demand anyway. So now they get to watch them almost live. I don't think that they'll ever do the kind of the global tours they used to do.
And those ones, like the ones that I went, the regional ones, I went to one in Manchester a couple of years ago, and they were really brilliant. They were really well done, those, and I really enjoyed those sort of smallish community events, and they were put on by community groups with assistance from Microsoft, and I really enjoyed those. So I hope maybe something like that could return, which were a little bit more focused, a little bit more regional based. That I think possibly, it was Windows on Tour or something it was called, but it was a lot of very community or local community. So it was a local user groups that were putting these events on. And
sure, and you've also got things like in the UK, we have the Microsoft Experience Centre in London where the old Microsoft Store used to be. So there are various sort of venues and locations where much smaller scale events can happen. But I'd be interested to see, in 2023, if they try and do, say, a Seattle-based build event, and then maybe an Ignite event down in Orlando or somewhere. Who knows? I think it would be a shame if they stayed fully virtual for everything forevermore. I think they should give people the choice.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah, there's probably a future to do both. I think.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's going to be people who will never want to go to another, in-person event ever again. I can certainly understand that feeling, and I can see why people would simply prefer to do things virtually forevermore or for the foreseeable future. But I think there also has to be a choice.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. But a good thing is like Bill and things like that, we'll be able to follow along and find and watch it sort of live stream from home as well, which is good.
The one thing I don't miss is I don't miss all the awful swag. People got so obsessed with getting swag. And it's like, oh, crikey, how many coffee cups do you really need?
What you mean, like Windows ones? Yeah, I've got a nice Windows Insider one here. I want more swag, but ship it to me so I don't have to go out and get it. Even better. Now, something slightly different that we kind of missed the other week, Richard. You spotted that something we definitely like using here. I've got my Raspberry Pi 400 on the shelf there. There's a new Pi module out, isn't there?
Yes, yeah. We'll say out-ish. It's the Compute Module 4S. So I think back in 2020, the Compute Module 4 was launched. And what the Compute Module is, it's kind of your Raspberry Pi for industry. So instead of being, a Pi with all the interfaces like Ethernet and HDMI on it, it's basically just a board. And they've been doing really well because industry loves them because you've got effectively a computer on an easy to use board. You find them in lots and lots of digital signage, lots of industry applications. So they're pretty good, and they are basically a Pi. But they've always been on a SODIMM form factor. Although obviously don't use them as a memory DIMM, but it means the connectors are all standard, and they'd stuck with that right up to the Compute Module 3 Plus, which was basically a Raspberry Pi 3 Plus Model B, I think. So you had the Cortex A53 and a gig of RAM, what have you. And then last year they brought out the Compute Module 4, which had the chips from the Raspberry Pi 4. So it had the chunkier Cortex A72. It could have up to 8 gigs of RAM, I think, and also a bunch of flash. And you had various HDMI options too, and I think Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and things were all there. So great, it was fantastic. The problem is they changed the form factor, which is inconvenient for many in industry. Yeah. That said, still sold well, like as I understand it. The problem is at the moment you can't get them for love nor money. It's very hard to get hold of them. It's very hard to get hold of the Compute Module 3 Plus as well. So what the Raspberry Pi team appear to have done is for customers that need it. So you can't just go up to the Pi Hut or somewhere and order one of these things, but you can contact Raspberry Pi directly and say, I need these because I'm an industry person and I need to have 1,000 now. And what it is, it's that they've gone back to the old form factor the previous compute modules. That's the SODIMM form factor. But it's got the Raspberry Pi chip on it, from the 4. So you've got the 1.4 the 1.5 gigahertz Cortex A772 on there, only gig of RAM, and only one HDMI out. But I think it's 4K, so not too bad. So that's what's happened. I'm not sure how much they cost. I think it depends how many you're buying. I think it's certainly not more than the current compute module 4, if you can get hold of them. But again, if you can get hold of one, there are delays of like 6 months or longer on getting hold of them.
Right.
These things appear to be much quicker, and I gather that's because the Raspberry Pi team are using bits and pieces that they've got, whereas I think the chips on the compute module 3, which is also out of stock, they simply they can't get those chips in at the moment because of supply chain problems, and so they've introduced this kind of beefed up module, which is great for most purposes. The one thing to bear in mind is that while it will be a speed boost over the compute module 3 plus, it's not a plug and play change, because you will need to update things like Linux. I think you need a 5.10 kernel based distro to run with the compute module 4S, whereas obviously compute module 3 didn't have such limitations. So it's new hardware. Yay, great. Probably can't get it for a while. I think they're going to wait until the supply chain situation settles down a bit before they make it generally available. I know the foundation has, I think, perhaps embarrassed is the wrong word, but they'd rather not launch a thing and then say it's out of stock immediately. But if you are in need of a good few of these, then the compute module 4S is now an option.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And I guess it's just a shame for the average so from the consumer side, you're not going to be able to get all of those. You can't just ring them up and ask for one for your little project. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think even up to said it's for high volume customers at the moment, which is kind of a shame because Raspberry Pi was supposed to be all about the hobbyists, but I guess they have to also pay the bills as well.
Yeah, and you can still get the Pi 4, kind of the various editions of the Pi, the Pico.
Well, good luck. It's quite difficult at the moment. I'm not quite sure what's in stock at the moment. Last time I checked, I couldn't get anything apart from the Pi 400, and I think I could get the Pico. The two ones I could get. I couldn't get any Pi 4 Model Bs at all.
Right.
But that again, stock comes in, stock goes out, and they are just unfortunately subject to the same supply constraints as the rest of the industry. And it's one of those things. I think the problem is they can't flex their production up, so they've now got themselves in a situation where they're a few months behind the curve, and they can't flex production up enough to kind of meet the back orders, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a shame that, because I just got a few Pis a few months ago, and I got the 400 last year, I guess it was, and that I got there was no problem. But the 400 is a bit more expensive, isn't it? Because you've got the keyboard and everything else, which is probably why there's a bit more of those around.
Yes, I mean, I'm just just doing a quick online check now, and I can't see any Raspberry Pi 4 Model Bs around at all. But the 400s you can still, but they are more expensive, as you say.
Yeah. Nice little kit for Windows 11 on.
I must admit, I run emulators on mine mainly.
Yeah, I've seen that they repackaged the Amiga 500 and sold it as a mini Amiga 500, and I think that came out this week or last week. I've seen a few reviews of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's called it 500 Mini. It looks like a small version of the Amiga 500, and I think it comes with 500 games or X amount of games on it. I can't remember the exact quantities, but I was kind of thinking, well, why don't you just get a Raspberry Pi and run it? But I suppose you've got the keyboard form factor. But I'm not sure whether you can install your own things on it or whether it's just preset with them. I've seen a few of these type of things. It was a Spectrum one a while ago that was like games only, and that's kind of loses the interest for me. I want it to be the original thing. So either the original or use a Raspberry Pi, and you can get some great emulators for something like the Amiga. You can get the Amiga emulator, you can get an Atari emulator and a Spectrum emulator all in one Raspberry Pi. So there's it's that one device will emulate everything. I suppose the only thing you're gaining is a closer resemblance to the original hardware keyboard, but the 5400 is a nice.
Although
I
don't think, does the Amiga 500 Mini keyboard actually work though? Or is it just an
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I don't know. It does have some original games with it, which I guess you do need the keyboard for, unless they're all just joystick control ones. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just looking at. Yeah, it looks like a bit like the Commodore 64 thing they did recently, which was
exactly.
It looked like a Commodore 64, but the keyboard didn't work. It was just a little box which you'd have to plug things in yourself. So you may even have to plug a keyboard into it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. To be honest, I saw it and kind of just dismissed it because I had an Amiga 500 and 1200, but I just emulated through a Raspberry Pi, which is so I can play Shadow of the Beast. Do you remember Shadow of the Beast?
Very well, very well. I used to have an Amiga 500.
That was the first game I ever played on it, and I went from a Spectrum, so I was playing 48K Spectrum games, and then got an Amiga 500 and played Shadow of the Beast. And just the leap in technology that brought with the music and the cinematic cutscenes, everything. It was just a massive. I was really blown away by the quality of that. The Amiga 500 was, it was. I maybe if you'd used other systems around that time, it wasn't so much of a leap. But from a 48K Spectrum to an Amiga 500,
it was just huge,
massive.
Because I went from my Texas Instruments 99 to an Atari ST, and then from there to an Amiga. And I know at the time there was a lot of discussion between the Amiga and the and the ST, but the Amiga was just so far ahead. It was just it mind blowing how far ahead it was.
Yeah, the graphics and the music and the sounds and everything. It was. I really loved it, and then I when I remember the 1200, and I got a hard drive for it. I really enjoyed that. It was for me, it went from sort of Sinclair to the Amigas, and then to PCs and 486s and that kind of thing. But it's a shame the Amigas kind of were killed off or died off through that, because it was such a great time. It was another like little golden age, wasn't it? A race between at that time definitely. It was Atari and Commodore.
Yeah, I mean, I think once PCs got VGA graphics working properly and games working properly, then and came down in price sufficiently. At that point, the Amigas and Atari STs, their days were sadly numbered, and obviously everyone got PCs or consoles, because I think I think the PlayStation and the NES also, the Super NES also came out as well. So all those things I think played a factor in the eventual demise of the Amiga, but it was a great machine.
Yeah, a good community as well. I went my first first bulletin boards, I think, through the Amiga 500. What was it called? What was that protocol? F something. Oh, I can't remember. It was a dial-up protocol, and you got onto bulletin boards, and then you could download software. I mean, my mum complaining that I was tying the phone line up.
Okay. See, this is it. See, now I've gone down a proper click here. Yeah, so that Amiga 500 doesn't look like it's got a working keyboard. You can, however, get a Commodore 64. They've now done that with a working keyboard and a VIC-20 as well. So that's great. Interestingly, regarding the Amiga, I know that you can use the Raspberry Pi, I think, in the Amiga to effectively give it a speed boost by using the Pi in emulation mode. And I think it bypasses the CPU, so you can kind of make your Amiga 500 absurdly fast by using the Pi to take the load off. So
you could make it like a 1200.
Or more, I think, or perhaps near a 4000 or beyond, because obviously the 4000 was the one that we all wanted.
That was like the big, like pizza box type one, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
Yes, I remember that. Garry, did you was that because you that time you were a professional developer, weren't you? Did you develop for the Amiga?
Not for the Amiga, I did do for the ST. I mean, that's actually it was a dichotomy, wasn't it? The Amiga had its own sort of market. The ST actually did get into business for a while, so it became something for people wanted development done for that. And also, obviously, also on the music side of things, MIDI interface, which, as I'd say, the ST still was ahead of the Amiga on that, but obviously the graphics and graphic design, people were using that for the Amiga, and that wasn't the area I was in at the time. Although I did contribute to some of the games which got ported into both markets, so it was an interesting time.
One of the chips was called Agnes, wasn't it? And then on the
Yep.
1200, it was called Fat Agnes.
Agnes, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. It was funny when we had those that era of a bit like in the early 80s, and then again with that later period of those rapid developments, and then when you had competing systems, and then things settled down over time, and we're a bit like that now, aren't we? Where PC technologies. It's still obviously you've got new graphics cards coming out all the time from Nvidia and everything else, but it has in principle it's settled down now, isn't it?
Yeah. The Raspberry Pi thing I'm thinking about is called the Pi Storm.
Right, and that's the second accelerator for it.
You basically stick it into the old 68,000 socket, and then away you go. And I think you can also gives you a real-time clock, but also puts in absurd amounts of RAM, because obviously the Amiga had 512 kilobytes, I think, which you could upgrade to 1 megabyte under the hood, or plug in more if you were brave enough for expansion ports. But obviously your Pi has got a lot more memory than that.
Yeah, that's
you don't need more than 500 megs.
512 kilobytes.
Yeah, what's anybody going to do with more than 512 kilobytes?
64 kilobytes.
Yeah. Hi, mem 386. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be getting my Pi 400 set up with the emulator. I think I'm going to get that back. I'm going to play Shadow of the Beast.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend. I mean, the Pi 400 is a great emulation machine, because you've got the keyboard there, and if you've bought the Pi 400 kit, you've got the Raspberry Pi mouse, but any USB mouse works anyway. So, actually, speaking of Raspberry Pi and mice, did you see they've updated the Raspberry Pi OS?
Oh no, I didn't.
Week? Yeah, it's. I mean, the big ticket thing is the fact that the default Pi user's gone now. You've got to actually create a user during the setup, which makes a lot of sense. Although I know a lot of people who use them in classrooms are going to find that deeply irritating, but it makes a lot of sense security-wise. But what I've tried it out. What was brilliant was Bluetooth now works during setup, so you don't have to have a USB keyboard or mouse plugged in to set the thing up. You can use a Bluetooth mouse.
That's handy.
Setup makes Bluetooth keyboards and mouse work, which is, you know what? Yeah, account's fine, but that for me is like, oh, thank goodness at last.
Yeah, that saves you going in the cupboard trying to find the USB keyboard for the setup part.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to go and get my. I think I'm going to go fire up my Raspberry Pi 400 and get some emulations going.
Go for it.
Yeah, there's a nice. I think it's called RetroPie, isn't it? That has all the emulators built into it. Or
it does. Yes.
Option,
yeah. Yeah, it's got all the home computers, and of course loads of arcade stuff too. So, but then obviously you need to have the ROMs to hand as well.
Yes, you do. You need to have the Workbench ROMs, I seem to remember.
Yes.
So
yes.
Make sure you've got your original Workbench disk ready handy.
It's not too hard to actually dump the ROMs from your Amiga if you want to. Although I believe there is a third party where you can buy them from. And if you don't have access to them, of course, there's always ways and means.
Yeah. I remember you had to supply your own ROMs, but it doesn't take that much research to find those.
Yes, to find how to download them from the hardware you already have.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, although I think I did actually get rid of. Sadly, I got rid of my Amiga 500. I wish I kept that. I kept the Spectrums, but I didn't keep the Amigas. But then I can't keep every computer because I get in trouble for having too much stuff in the loft as it is, and on shelves behind me and so on. In fact, a good place to go is one of the computer museums in Cambridge. You can go and play on them there.
You can indeed, yeah. Or even Windows 3.1, which turned 30 last week, was it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Can't get it working on Hyper-V, so I didn't do a video of that.
And ZX Spectrum turns 40, I think, next week or the week after. So crikey.
Blimey, that's yeah. I remember my Spectrum is still over there, so that's 40 years old. Wow. Hopefully the computer museums will have some stuff on that as well. I think I've seen a couple of videos from Jason Fitzpatrick at Cambridge, so I think they've got some content there. And if you want to go play the originals, nick down to one of those the museums in Cambridge or Bletchley, because you can get on every version of the Spectrum or Commodore or whatever you want. They're all there. They're all fantastic.
There. Yeah. The actual hardware's all there, fired up, ready for you to think, God, this is not as good as I remember it being.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, this is slightly more clunky than I remember it being.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, on that note, we shall leave it for this week. So, Garry, car still going okay and everything?
I was going brilliantly. Yeah, took it for its first long runs at the weekend. Managed to top over 3.6, I think, was miles per kilowatt hour, which means it's pretty cheap to run because that was 70 odd. I mean, basically it was getting around about 270 miles of range out of an overnight charge, which cost me about £4 or £5. So I was quite pleased with that.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's really good. And so I presume you got some more videos up there as well on your channel.
Oh yeah, load more. Doing a couple of things. That's it. The long trip I did was actually down to Kia's headquarters actually to see the launch of their next EV. So I've got some video of that coming up fairly shortly. Hopefully, anyway. I've got so much content for that trip though, so it's going to take me about 6 weeks to edit it, I reckon.
Excellent. So where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Garry with 2 R's WMA on Twitter.
Excellent stuff. And Richard, where can we find you and your Lego?
At Richard_Speed on Twitter.
And have you got round the glue for your launch pads? Your rocket boosters, wasn't it? You were doing?
Not mentioning glue.
Okay.
We don't talk about glue.
Whatever you do, don't mention glue. I think I mentioned it once, but I got away with it.
Yeah, didn't get away with it.
Excellent. Well, we'll be back same time, same place next week. You can email me, ian@thislifestyle.com. I'm at iSticks on Twitter. See you next week.
Okay.
Cheerio.